everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5-Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
You damn right, Mr. Hansen. We are here. I don't want to big ourselves up too much, but what is happening, Rush Nation? My goodness, we talked about it last week, how we're hurtling there. We are basically nose cone, if you were a plane, through the proverbial sound barrier of the fantasy football playoffs. As always, co-pilot on this mission. What's the co-pilot in a ship called? First officer. Let's go for that. Except he's not. We're joined. Big man, how are you?
Yeah, I'm all grand, buddy. We're into the nitty gritty. 5 weeks left of the entire season. 2 weeks of the fantasy, 2 weeks of the regular season left. So we're really in this spot now where trade deadlines have kind of passed in most leagues. Yeah, in Dynasty you might have a few that are still going, which is great. But we're kind of at this point now where we need to focus on how do we win the path to victory. For the 1 seeds and the 2 seeds and people challenging high up in the buys, to those that are scraping in, because there's a few players that we'll talk about that you can add on waivers tonight that you can go ahead and utilize and pick up. But there isn't loads, and the waiver wire has been thin. There is a couple of players you should absolutely add this week. We'll definitely get into that. But really, realistically, is the squad you've got is what you've got now. And so it's making do. And there are options off the waiver wire or free agency that you can bring in to strengthen your chances of winning a title if you're one of those lower seeds. And if you're one of those higher seeds and you've locked a place, you can actually sort of block that strategy by utilizing some of the players and the plays that we'll talk about. So we're going to talk about some streamers. We're going to talk about some waivers. We're going to talk about some strength of schedule stuff for the rest of the season, including the playoffs. And we're just going to dive in and just talk about how we try and either mitigate paths to victory for others or create paths to victory to ourselves. And it's this point of the season where championships are won and lost, and the moves that you can make can significantly improve your chances. You need some stuff to go your way, of course, but it's increasing those opportunities when they come.
Yeah, is that why your name is the Commissioner of Chaos? Because we are about to try and mess stuff up for everybody
100%.
except yourself. Yeah,
100%. It literally, I decided to put my sub name as the Commissioner of Chaos for that reason. Is I'm here to instruct chaos upon everybody's fantasy leagues, and those that listen now, there will be some stuff that will be highly relevant, some stuff that will be really relevant, and some stuff that will be sort of marginally relevant. But I will sort of toot my own horn here, as I think that over the course of the next hour, there will be something for everybody here. And except for those that aren't going to make playoffs in any leagues, then thank you very much for sticking with us and supporting us when you haven't got much on the line. I don't think that's going to be anybody. But I think really now it's how to sharpen the tools. How do we increase the paths to victory? And that could either be by blocks or could be by addition for ourselves and strengthening our own rosters, or both. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the show. Should be really, really good.
well, we're going to be talking about some strength of schedule stuff, and when it comes to streaming, obviously we think of kickers and DSTs. Is now a time potentially, if you are looking good into a playoff run and your bench is fairly strong, but with a couple of spare places, is now a time to be adding potentially a second or a third DST to lock in your playoff run now to get ahead of the curve? Is that something we can look at doing? All right, maybe 3, but
no, I don't really like having 2 DSTs. I would say if you're locked and you're on course for the bye, I would say make the change to the DST now because it shouldn't hurt you too much. And we could talk about a few options that are really good. There's one that will just be good all the way through. There's a couple that will be really good from after this week, and you take the hit now and then make the change. But ultimately, I don't believe in rostering 2 DSTs unless you're going to you're in a final and you're blocking somebody. I just think it's suboptimal. Unless you've got a really deep bench, it's really suboptimal for me. So I guess the good place to start is ideal roster construction, right? So for me, when I'm looking at my rosters, okay, if I'm already in the playoffs and I'm chasing a bye, I feel pretty good. Most of my buys are out the way in terms of the players that are going to have a bye. If most of those are kind of out the way, then I'm thinking, oh, didn't mean to do that. Apologies. Then I'm kind of at this point where I'm like, okay, how do we get the best position to be in to win? I'm just looking at a league I've got because it's a good example of the type of bench that you should have. Right, here we go. So I shared this with the patrons a couple of weeks ago. So for me, if you're already kind of through, I would not be having any quarterbacks or tight ends or kickers or DSTs on my bench. The only exception is you've got a Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels bye in week 14, and then you're kind of putting up a stash play for week 14 at quarterback. I'm kind of okay with that. In any other position, I mean, like Ertz, Andrews, they're not strong enough to warrant having a backup for, in my opinion. So I'm kind of like, well, I'm quite happy to let them go if I can pivot to like a Jonnu Smith, or I can pivot to a different tight end. Depending on the strength, you might need to bring in a replacement if what you've got is better than what's out there. But in ideal situations, most of your tight ends will have had the bye. Most of your quarterbacks, most of your players that have had the bye. There's not many buys left. You're only looking at Arizona. No, Arizona have had their bye.
Yep.
It's just Baltimore, Washington. There is two more.
Atlanta are on bye this week.
No, Atlanta had their bye. That was last week. So it's 6 teams. Denver, of course. Houston. The Colts. I'm looking it up.
Please hold.
Well, the Patriots don't matter, right? Because you shouldn't really have any Patriots assets unless it's Drake May. But I imagine Drake May more often than not is your backup quarterback. So, you can cut him. But everybody else, for me, I think you're leaning into hoping your QB survives the next 5 weeks. And if they don't, then, a suboptimal QB isn't going to get you where you need to get to anyway. So, like, rostering one for the sake of it doesn't really help you. So for me, it's really simple. Like, I'm only focused on keeping running backs and some wide receivers on my bench. Again, you're looking at those teams on bye. You're looking at Henry, the fantasy relevant players at wide receiver and running back. It's Henry, Flowers, Sutton, Mixon, Collins, Dell, Josh Downs is week to week, so he might be sat down until the bye. So then that makes Pittman relevant. Pierce, maybe Jonathan Taylor, maybe Stevenson for the Patriots. And then Brian Robinson's injured, and he's probably not going to play before the bye, I would expect. Eckler's in the concussion protocol, so he's probably not going to be fit for this week, and then therefore he's going to be out for 2 weeks. So it looks like it'd be McNichols until the bye. So you'll probably have to bring in some backups. I think like so there's not many like strongly urgent fantasy players here that we have left to get through the bye. And if you are on course to secure a bye before week 14, then it's all irrelevant. Like, you just deal with it. I wouldn't be sacrificing a winning playoff strategy for it, but then knowing you're not playing in week 15, that gives you some room to think about what you want to do for the final 2 weeks of the season. So it's just kind of one of those things that you need to be thinking about securing the bye, getting through to week 15, and then thinking about optimal performance. And the best ways to do that is to stash running backs. So the best thing you can do right now in that position, if you're in a position of so either you've secured a bye or you've secured a playoff place, but you can't, or you're very unlikely to get a bye, because that scenario is also in play. You could have 8 wins. You might not be able to get a bye, but you playoffs, right? So in those situations, you want to be thinking about what is the best path to victory. We know that the running back position is so weak in terms of genuine standout performance that if you end up getting a player that usurps into a significant position, you will end up with potentially a league winner. We see it most years. So the players I've got that I highlight as significant upside running backs are Zach Charbonnet, Jordan Mason, Blake Corum, Braylon Allen. They're kind of, for me, like four of the biggest that you can get. Gus Edwards, and now J.K. Dobbins got an injury last night. Gus Edwards now is someone you should go and add immediately because J.K. Dobbins, we know, with his injury history. So Gus Edwards becomes an instant fantasy relevant back, but he's another one that should be rostered in most leagues. Devin Singletary, potentially, but how good are the Giants going to be? I wouldn't say they're a primo like handcuff, but it's one to have. You've got your RIP Tommy DeVito, Tommy Cutlets hat on. I think that I'm looking at teams and thinking that's the core, and you've got to have those players on your bench where possible. Justice Hill is another example. We saw what he did last night. These are all players I'd be looking to add and having on benches ASAP, because if you and the ones that and even Kenneth Gainwell is another candidate as well. Is another player I'd be considering in that sort of upper echelon of players with teams with high running back usage. If you can't get all of those players, someone like Sean Tucker of Tampa is another example of a player that could have high impact. If something happens to either Rashad White or Bucky Irving, then he will see an increase in touches. He's already got an NFC Player of the Week award this season. So for me, they're the kind of key players. And then when I've talked about on Patreon casts, high usage of players, there's a couple of teams which their running backs have had high touches: Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry, Kyron Williams, and they're in that kind of zone of overusage potentially. Yep. And so that burnout is real, and they might see reduced touches. So people like Jaylen Warren for Najee Harris fit into that category. You've got keep an eye on a player that absolutely no one is keeping an eye on is Williams out of New Orleans. He's pretty much been out most of the season, but he's nearing a return. But Jamal Williams, what was it, like 2-3 years ago, had like that 15 touchdown season before he signed in New Orleans. Oh, it's 2-0 Arsenal, by the way.
Excellent.
So good going on the Gunners. And then I think that is the key makeup. So for me, I want to have as many of those running backs on my bench if I don't need to worry too much about the buys. And then that way, we've seen it in previous years. I've talked about this loads of times, the CJ Andersons, the Trent Williamses. But we've seen it over the years when a player comes into the end of a season and they start usurping. Cam Akers, sorry, that's another player I've missed. Cam Akers is one I'd have on this list as players that could see a huge trajectory if there was a lead back out. So those scenarios are really important to track and to have on your bench, because if an injury does happen, you've got the next best thing. You don't need to go and bid for it. You walk straight in. So, and if you're a team that is really strong, you want to stop players. So if you're on the buy, you want to have those players in your pocket to come straight up because you don't need your bench over the next couple of weeks. But also, you want to stop your opponents from getting an edge. So if, for example, let's take a league, a fictitious league, where you're a Barkley owner and I go and pick up Gainwell and I'm heading to the buy. If Barkley goes down injured next week and he's out for 4 games, that's his season done. And you can't go and get Gainwell because I've got him, whether I play him or not. I have blocked your path to Kane up on me, because I can play Gainwell, and Gainwell might be an RB1 and RB2, and he might fit in nicely to what I need. He might not be. He might be someone I may never have any intention of playing. But if he puts up reasonably good fantasy numbers, that stops you, and that's a big hole in your fantasy roster you then have to try and fill. I would recommend handcuffing your own running backs if they're significant as well, because then you're not conceding the drop-off. So in the start of the season, we always say handcuffing your own running backs is suboptimal, because your opportunity to gain upside is nil, because you're just going to get a played down version of what you drafted. Yep. So you're taking out an insurance policy, but you're getting 70% of what you've drafted in most cases. Whereas if you draft other people's handcuffs and then the situation happens, you gain all the upside. So instead of getting a 30% loss, you get a huge upside on the other side. That's the thinking, right? And that's the game within the game, the strategy you play to win. And so for me, it's really important that you try and block others, but increase your upside. But if in this case, where we are now in the season, the insurance policy is probably better than the upside, because there's less weeks now for injury. So the chances of injuries decrease every single week because there's less games. So actually you need to take your own insurance policy out, because that's going to be the quickest redemption hole for you. And if you never have to take the insurance policy out because your player stays fit, then happy days. So if you've got Christian McCaffrey, Jordan Mason's a must add. If you've got Kyron Williams, Blake Corum is your number one ad, and these guys should be relatively cheap or free. I mean, maybe people haven't dropped Jordan Mason. I imagine Jordan Mason's numbers will start to deteriorate in the next 7 days. So I think that for me is like the real key strategy part of this, is thinking about your roster construction and thinking about having the most opportunities to win. And then your wide receivers should be supplemental, right? You should have wide receivers that just have, again, a bit of insurance to what you've got your starting lineup, cover buys. Or if you've got players in your bench now that you would never throw in under any circumstances, they need to go. And you need to go and get high upside wide receivers. So for me, I'd be targeting the Marcus Valdes-Scantlings, the Noah Browns, the Nick Westbrook-Akeens of this world, and I'd be having them as those high upside plays. If I've got, and again, this is over, there's a line, right? I'm not cutting like Jameson Williams, because Jameson Williams has upside. I'm not cutting, I'm trying to think where the line kind of draws. Jacoby Myers down is probably it. So I'm thinking like those mid wide receiver 3s or wide receiver 4s. So I'm trying to think of a good example here. I'm trying to think of a really good sort of relatable answer here that will help with this. I would say Rashad Bateman, but he scored last night and had a good game, so probably not Rashad Bateman.
Let me throw some names at you. So let's say 36 downwards. Did you get Cedric Tillman?
No, because I think he's got upside.
Christian Watson.
Yeah, well, yeah, probably. He's got high upside, low floor, but I don't trust it the rest of the way. I do think he's got some positive matchups over, say, Romeo Dobbs, but kind of on the fence there.
Jerry Jeudy.
No, I'd keep him because I think he's got the positive game script at the moment with Jameis.
After this, it gets a bit murky. We've got, obviously, Jordan Addison you're keeping. Interesting one. Quentin Johnson.
Yeah, he can go. I think 0 targets last night. I think he's very matchup dependent. I do think he has a couple of decent matchups coming up, but I think he's also got equally as many bad ones. So that's probably a really good one. I think it's all Lav McConkey all the time in Chargers land. So yeah, he's probably about that sort of range of player I would start thinking of dropping. Gabe Davis can go. I think he's on IR now anyway. So
yeah, isn't he broken?
So Ricky Pearsall can go.
Wandale
trying to-
Robinson.
PPR league, I'd keep him, especially with Tommy Cutlets, because they need to throw. But in a half point or standard, he can go. Yeah, I'm just trying to look at some. It's hard to kind of iterate what the Vilay's a player I'd be looking to add. He's starting to be on the upside. Troy Franklin, if he's on any of your rosters, unless it's Dynasty, he can go.
I think I started Troy Franklin this week in a redraft because it was so deep.
That's problematic.
I had some buys. But that's the sort of number, isn't it? Sort of 42 onwards, something like that.
Yeah, I think so. And I think you've even got players that I would be really... I think you can start to be really ruthless on players like potentially... I was going to say DJ Moore, but he just about got through a half-decent game. So maybe not, but he would have been like on the edge for me. Keenan Allen can go. There's one. Yeah, definitely like Keenan Allen. Xavier Legette, he can go. Jalen Coker, he can go. Xavier Worthy's interesting, high upside, but never lands enough. Demario Douglas, maybe. Tyler Lockett, he can go. Tolbert, he can go. Gibson, Demarcus Robinson, all these sorts of players. These are the types of players you can get rid of.
Yeah. Just looking down the strength of schedule for wide receivers, and Las Vegas only have 2 wide receivers listed on Fantasy Pros thanks to schedule. They don't even have a wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I wouldn't even bother because I don't even think wide receiver 2 is relevant. I think it's literally Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers. All you kind of need to know. You don't really need to know anybody else in that scenario because they're not going to do anything.
No.
Trey Tucker's doing nothing. DJ Turner's doing nothing. Like for me, yeah, like if we go through that list, right, I can give you all the names of players I've cut. I'm not going to read them all, but New England, you could probably cut everyone. Although if you want to keep Douglas because his schedule's half decent, maybe. I'd get rid of everyone on the Chargers except Lab McConkey. I'd keep Neighbors and Robinson at PPR. I'd cut everyone from the Raiders. I'd cut everyone except maybe Worthy. I don't have any Worthy, so I'm not that bothered. But I'd just about keep Tank Dell, but it's an issue. I'd keep the Tennessee 2. I'd keep Vila, keep Addison. I'd keep obviously Nakura and Cup. I'd keep Darnell Mooney. You probably cut Ray McLeod. You can cut. Yeah, but he's been flex worthy.
Yeah, for sure.
Jalen Waddle would have said was a cut, but he had a really good game at the weekend. Amari Cooper's an interesting one. So I think Amari Cooper's in cut territory, right? You might want to keep him another week, but nothing's happened since he's been traded. He's been injured. He's playing through an injury. Like, if you're kind of desperate, he for me is very much in like cut territory. Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch can go. Mike Williams can go. Tyler Lockett can go. Jalen McMillan, Sterling Shepard can go. Jalen Coker, Xavier Legette. I'd actually keep Adam Thielen. I think he's the only one there I'd probably take a spin on. I'd cut Elijah Moore. I'd cut Yoshivas. I'd cut Deontay Johnson. I'd cut Parker Washington. I'd cut Luke McCaffrey. I'd cut Keenan Allen. I'd cut Jalen Tolbert. I'd cut Brandon Cooks. Yeah, Christian Watson is an interesting one. I think given how tough the schedule is, I'm almost more inclined to cut Romeo Dobbs than Christian Watson because Christian Watson does have that kind of big play. But Romeo Dobbs, of all the receivers for coverage over the next 5 weeks, has single-handedly the worst schedule I've ever seen. Like he is like a bottom 6 matchup receiver. Like I could put him in my column now for the rest of the season every week. Like I was doing this on the Patreon. I was doing this like week by week analysis. I was like, "Oh my god, it's Romeo Dobbs again! Oh my god, it's Romeo Dobbs again! Oh my god, it's Romeo Dobbs!" And it's like every week was like he was in there. It was like one of the top 4-5 worst receiver matchups of the week, and it was every week his name was in there as like a bottom 5 matchup against their their quarterback coverage. Like he can go. He might outperform that, but I think for me, Romeo Dobbs is one of the more matchup dependent wide receivers in the NFL. So I can understand people will go, I don't want to cut him, and that's totally fine. I probably feel pretty comfortable cutting him with what I know.
Sounds fair.
So yeah, I think that's kind of it. So and then like if I'm thinking about waivers this week, right? So Gus Edwards, I'd be throwing most of the fab at. If I needed to get into the playoffs, and he's out there, I would be throwing a lot of the fab out there for him. If you need a 1 week play, Jeremy McNichols, as I said, of Washington looks a good play. I think Noah Gray at tight end for the upside. You saw what he did at the weekend. He's done that. I think he's got more fantasy points than Dalton Kincaid this season.
Wow.
So, Noah Gray's an interesting one who's getting more and more work. So he could be a really interesting pickup at tight end for a position that is pretty crap. Obviously, Marcus Valdes-Scantling, if he's out there, you've got to add him with what he's done the 2 weeks before the bye. Drake May, if you need a quarterback. Cowboys DST. We'll talk about some streaming DSTs as well, but they're kind of the ones for me that I kind of picked up.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the list here. There's nobody you haven't mentioned. I mean, Tyler Algiers on it, but
yeah, Algiers interesting. I'm not too sure. We have had a question come in from George Play 01. Hi guys, I'm 9-3 first place. Should I trade Bucky and JSN for Henry? My RBs: Barkley, Gibbs, Benson, Mason. My wide receivers: Marvin Harrison Jr., DJ Moore, Waddle, Hopkins, and Amari Cooper. I'm assuming this is a dynasty league because I can't see that happening in like a regular league.
No.
Yeah, I mean, look, for me, I always play to win. So, yeah, I'd feel pretty comfortable trading those pieces for Henry to win a league. I think that could put you over the top if you think it can. I would, yeah, I mean, especially if you're not giving up any draft capital, I would probably look at try and do Henry for picks first because you'll be picking so late anyway. But if you can't do that, I'd be pretty comfy with that trade because I think for me, and again, you've got dynasty advice where it's all about playing optimally and strategy, and it's a different strategy game. Me, I play to win every season. That's just kind of how I go. I will trade assets to push all in to win leagues. That's just how I play. I play in a very aggressive format and take advantage of the dynasty guys who believe in stockpiling picks. I'm more than happy to capitalize on that strategy all the time because I'll take a championship any day of the week and twice on Sundays. So that's always been my view. So I would trade the draft capital if you can't. I feel pretty comfortable trading them away. I think you get 2 years out of Henry.
I mean, famously, Murph, you said you trade your own mother for a championship. So
Absolutely.
There we go.
Yeah, I mean, back in season 1 of like whatever many episodes we're in now, nearly 900. Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely would. Like I play to win. Like that's just how I play. I get aggressive. I take risks, and that's the way it goes. And I don't beat myself up if the risk doesn't pay off. I'd beat myself up more for not taking the gamble. That's just how
I mean, quite frankly, it is a miracle that I've not been traded away for something rather over the past 6 or 7 years. The fact that I'm still here.
I've not received an offer that was big enough.
Oh, marvelous! It's definitely makes me feel a whole lot better. Murph,
it tells you how much I value you. I've had some great offers.
Okay, that was a good save. Have you ever in your time watching football seen a team do a quick kick?
What type of kick?
A quarterback kicking it.
Back in the old days, yeah, not
So
for a long time.
I meant to bring this up last week, but I didn't. I was listening to, for those of you that don't know, my sister used to live in Utah for 3 years, right next to BYU Stadium. So I started following the Cougars closely when she was out there. And the good thing about them is they start playing at about 3:30 a.m. our time. So when I get up for work on a weekend at 4, I can listen to the whole game on the radio, basically, which is brilliant because I love listening to football on the radio. And 2 weeks ago in the BYU game, BYU were ahead and dominating the game, and the other team came out on 4th and something, looked like they were going to pass it, but did basically a quarterback punt, but it didn't go that far. And because the cornerbacks thought they were dropping back, they weren't watching the ball coming, and he kicked it towards his wide receiver, and flukily it hit the BYU cornerback on the helmet, therefore made the ball live, and the other team got it back. It was the most obscure thing to listen to on the radio. Wild, because I'd never heard of it, didn't know you could do it. They all thought in the studio that it hadn't hit the helmet. Then the refs looked at it, it had hit the helmet, and it was the other team's ball, and BYU ended up losing. It was crazy, and I'd never heard of it, so I wondered if you had. But
no, I mean, I've seen instances where they've had to kick, but like I have seen some instances where I think QB's like had to kick on the run or something like that. But yeah, very rare. I've got it lined up to watch after this, so I'm looking forward to that.
Check it out. So yeah, there you go.
Anyway,
what's next?
That's your question, George. What do you think? Where would you like to
go? Let's talk some fab. If you've not needed to use a lot of your fab on the waivers, or haven't used any, and you've now got some left, should you be using the Commissioner of Chaos theory here to overload fab bids to make sure you get players, not knowing that you need them? That doesn't really make sense, does it? Like, use more fab than you would normally to ensure you get them to cause maximum chaos.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you should absolutely use your fab. Like, I would be penny pinching now if there's a player you really want to get. Gus Edwards is a prime example, right? So you look at Gus Edwards this week, right? Short week. Don't think J.K. Dobbins is going to come back this week. It's unlikely. So it's hard to tell, right? It's Tuesday, but
yeah,
I'm going to work on the assumption that J.K. Dobbins is not going to play this week. So I would be pretty comfy putting in a higher than normal fab bid for Gus Edwards, purely on that reason of there's not much time left. You can't take the fab with you. So if I'm sitting there with like 80, 70 fab, I'd throw $20 out there and make sure no one can get it. So my fab budget strategy has kind of changed over the years. We didn't really do a lot of fab this season. I always believe that the more optimal strategy is to spend a good amount at the beginning for change maker players. So Hubbard, Mason would have been worth spending 50% plus of your fab, right? Given that they were going to get multiple games of performance. So I was pretty comfortable overbidding on players early. And at this point of the game, with the season, you're not going to get a ton out of the players that are left. So you might as well spend it. But if you're sitting here holding the bag, now listen, if you're holding the bag and you're 10-1, or you're 11-0, or 10-2, 11-1, 12-0, 9-3, then it doesn't matter. Like, it's worked for you, so you're fine. So yeah, I would throw the money at the players that are going to be an impact player that could cost you a bye, could cost you a playoff spot, or help you get there. So I look at Gus Edwards as the significant one. I'd be putting probably a slightly above average bid for Jeremy McNichols this week. Similar logic to Gus Edwards, but he's a 1 week play. So you don't need to empty the tank on Jeremy McNichols. But for me, I think you can empty, a good amount of fab on him, more than you would normally, to secure him. Because for this 1 week, he has an option of being a running back 2+ kind of territory with upside because there's no running game behind him. It's hard to sort of advocate, and like for DSTs, like Tampa, I'd overpay for. The Cowboys I'd overpay a little bit for their schedule in the coming games. Cincy and the Jags were ones that I've put some decent fab on. We'll get to streaming in a second, but I think for all those options, I'd be quite happy to quote unquote overpay. It's not an overpay if you've got the money, you're never going to spend it anyway.
Yep. No, that's fair. That's fair. I just didn't know whether with some teams being out of the race for the playoffs and then potentially having fab left or not, does the fab ratio change depending on the teams still left in, if that makes sense? Because some teams just aren't going to be bidding for players, but then the teams that are left in are going to be bidding higher. So I guess it does make sense.
I think in this scenario, right, every league's going to be different because every league of record is going to be different. So to have a prescriptive fab strategy based on number of players bidding is probably naive and maybe even difficult to predict. So I think for me, it's if you're holding a lot of fab, overbid to get the players you want. Look at the remaining fab bid from the remaining active players. Look at who your rivals are, put bids on accordingly, and outbid them. I don't think there's anyone I would empty the tank for. We could see what happens over the next couple of weeks. I would actually probably try and be smart and put myself into situations where I don't need the fab in coming weeks by stockpiling the players I kind of mentioned with those RBs and those players that I would look at and go, these are the players that I think if they were to usurp into a big opportunity would be worth emptying the fab for. So actually beat the rush, especially if you don't have a lot of fab, then actually spend the fab to acquire these players and to do that. Because I think you've got yourself. Let's take Blake Corum as an example. Blake Corum is a player that you can add for $0 almost every single week. Right? If I'm sitting there with 85 fab for the rest of the season, I look at the waivers, like Gus Edwards is gone. There's Jeremy McNichols. Okay, I'll add him as a 1 week play. Fine. My quarterbacks are off by, so great. I've got some space. Let's go from here. 3-0 Arsenal, by the way, away at Sporting Lisbon. That's a good result. Not even half time. I would do that, and I would spend money on Blake Corum. So I would spend $5, $10 on Blake Corum to make sure I got it. If Kyron Williams was injured,
right? Okay.
Then Blake Corum is all empty your fab play. Like you'd spend all the fab.
Yeah.
So it's buying insurance, or it's buying upside at a small premium. Yes, and like anytime you buy insurance, you buy it on the hope it never happens, right? You don't need the player. You don't ever want to have to plug them in. But if you do, or whatever insurance you buy in life, you buy it in the hopes you never need to claim on it. But if you do, then you're protected. And that's how I view like a Blake Corum. If I've got loads of money that I've not spent, I would be chucking $5, $10 on Blake Corum, making sure no one bid me up on him. It's as simple as that, really. Because I think I'd rather spend the money and get the player, and I've overpaid, than have underbid, not got the player, Kyron Williams gets injured, and Blake Corum goes and wins a league for someone else.
Yeah, nobody. The fab left in your bank at the end of the season counts for absolutely nothing.
No.
Well, let's talk some streamers then. Murphy mentioned it. Who are you streaming and where?
Okay, so if we look at, I pulled up some info here. I keep looking down because I've got it all saved here. If we look at the best schedules, right, for I start quarterback, best schedules for the next from week 13 to week 17. Okay, so Titans have the best schedule for quarterbacks. They have this is just fantasy playoffs. So other tools will tell you rest of season 13-14. I'm focused more on the playoffs now. But we could talk about what's different. You've got the Fantasy Pro strength of schedule in front of you. So I will use the strength of schedule stuff for the playoffs. You can tell me where there's differing for the next couple of weeks.
Yep.
So I got the Titans at 1.
Yep.
They have Cincy, Indianapolis. It's cut out. That's really annoying. Yeah, they have a. Let me pull up the bigger screen. As I saved it into Excel charts. Right, so they have week 15, Cincy, Indianapolis in week 16, and then Jacksonville. So they have an average 20.3 fantasy points per game. The players, the teams that they're playing against, that they're allowed to fantasy quarterbacks. So that's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
That is a heck of a lot. So Will Levis, I know he's not amazing, but it's still a good schedule. He'll have some upside. The Giants next on this list, they've got Baltimore, Atlanta, and Indianapolis. However, Tommy DeVito is just bad, right? I watched him against Tampa, and that's a huge plus matchup. And yeah, I mean, he got some yardage when the Bucs were 24-0 up and decided that they're just going to play cover 2, prevent defense, and not risk injuries. So, people will look at the box score of that game and go, oh, okay, well, Tommy DeVito put up like 200 yards passing. He wasn't that bad. He had 35 at halftime. The game was 24-0, and the Bucs just went, you ain't scoring 24 points in us. So they just dropped everyone back. They played cover 2, and they just sat there and just said, all right, listen, you're going to have some drives. Good luck to you. Like, have what you want. Doesn't matter. So it's a false positive reading on what he actually did. He did that in a game that was done. It was garbage time, but he had a whole half of garbage time. And he still only put up 7 points. So I'm not touching DeVito or Drew Luck on schedule, right? Bryce Young, he went toe-to-toe with the Chiefs. He looked pretty good. Like, he didn't look terrible. I still don't know if I trust him. So he has the third best schedule of Dallas, Arizona, and Tampa Bay, but I'm not sure I can go there. Baker Mayfield has a phenomenal schedule, so I'd be staying well away from that. Well, you can't get him; he'd be owned everywhere. But the fifth here is Kirk Cousins. So he's got Las Vegas, New York, and Washington, and he'll be playing meaningful football all the way through. So they're going to be in a division fight with Tampa Bay for the rest of the season. So they're not going to bench him. So it's a pretty good time to play Kirk Cousins. So those, for me, look to be the most optimal. I would say over the next couple of weeks, Cooper Rush, Bo Nix look decent, but Bo Nix does have a bye in 2 weeks, and then it gets a bit hairy in the playoffs.
Yeah. Interesting, the Giants, there's only 2 5-star teams for strength of schedule for the rest of season, and that's Tennessee and Tampa Bay. And everyone drops to 4, and then it's quite a few 4-star teams, but a lot of those quarterbacks are already owned, so you're not streaming them.
If you're in a Superflex league, I'd shout out Desmond Ridder. So Gardner Minshew's out for the season. I don't think Aiden O'Connell's back anytime soon. In the fantasy playoffs, Desmond Ridder has the Falcons, the Jaguars, and then the Saints. Saints, week 17 is not great, but those other 2 games are pretty tasty.
Yeah. Can you stream running backs at this point in the season? You can't really, can you?
Yeah, well, I think you can add the backups in the view of they're inheriting this phenomenal schedule. So,
interestingly, then I've clicked on running back for strength of schedule, and Detroit have the one of 2 5-star strength of schedules, and Saquon Barkley has the other. So if you own a Saquon Barkley, congratulations, heading for the rest of the season. But with David Montgomery's injury, is there another running back that is going to be the Knuckles or the stand-in Tails or Shadow or whoever it wants to be to the Sonic and Knuckles that Gibson, Montgomery have named themselves? Is there who's the next running back up, for instance, at Detroit?
So earlier in the season, I think they had an injury there, but earlier in the season, it was Craig Reynolds. So I don't know how fit he is. I don't think David Montgomery's too bad. So we keep an eye on it, but I don't think he's too bad. So I would say that probably Craig Reynolds is likely to be the guy, but he won't get David Montgomery workload. So he could be worth an ad if David Montgomery trends to out, but I don't think he's going to get heavy usage. The interesting scenario will be if they secure the bye, Craig Reynolds could be an interesting week 17 play because they might start resting players and Craig Reynolds might get half a game in week 17 to play.
Well, knowing Detroit, he could get all the game.
Could do. So they do have Simone Vake as well. So that's another one that they could do another 2-bit tandem. It's worth a punt. I would say also Detroit's schedule in the fantasy playoffs is not as good. So they're not in the top 5. Top 5 fantasy playoffs schedule is the Panthers. Now, I imagine Jonathan Brooks is probably still owned by a lot of players. So I can't imagine he's been dropped. But if people dropped him because he didn't play this week, that could be interesting. Braden Allen talked about the Cardinals. So Trey Benson share. If something happens to James Conner, interesting. Chargers, again, this is why you pick up Gus Edwards. Schedules next few weeks. I mean, I would expect J.K. Dobbins to come back, but if he doesn't, it gets good. And then the Raiders. The Raiders is really interesting. So Amir Abdullah came in this week. So, I mean, he did okay. I don't think he did phenomenally. The game script was kind of against him.
Yeah, it was.
But Alexander Mattison might have been dropped because of the injury. So Alexander Mattison becomes relevant for the fantasy playoffs. Maybe even Bam White gets a bit of love. So
what's interesting to me about your list and my list, Murph, is they are quite polarizing. There aren't many teams that are top 5 in both from now until the end and then just playoffs.
Yeah, which is why I think it's interesting that we do the 2 different takes, because you've got the schedule that includes the next 2 weeks, including the fantasy playoffs, but we also want to give the guidance to those that are focused on the playoffs, right? Because if you don't care about the next 2 weeks as much, then that you could look at that list and go, oh, okay, I'm going to go stockpile these. But actually, as we're starting to see, there's quite a bit of difference.
Yeah.
Who's on your list, top 5 then?
Okay, so my running backs now, that's 1 star. Detroit, Philly, Tampa, Jets, Cowboys are the top 5.
Okay.
There's a lot more 4-star teams as well. Interestingly, the Chargers are 3rd last with a 2-star strength of schedule, sorry.
Yeah, I think they got a tough couple of weeks, the Chargers.
Yeah.
Because the next 2 weeks they've got the Falcons and then the Chiefs.
Yeah, you don't run on the Chiefs.
No. So that's partly why.
Rough. I hope you're not relying on J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards in your last week against the Chiefs to get into the playoffs.
That's week 14. But then they get Tampa week 15, which is a dream. Then they got the Broncos, and it's much easier to run on them than pass on them. And then the Patriots. And if you play in week 18, they got the Raiders as well.
That's extra cream on top of that latte. Nice.
So if we move to wide receivers, Roman Dunze's schedule is redonkulous in the fantasy playoffs.
Nowhere near mine. Nowhere near.
So he has, in the fantasy playoffs, he has Minnesota, Detroit, and then Seattle. So to wide receivers per game, they're giving up Minnesota 32.2, Detroit 31.9, Seattle 28.3. So they got the 3rd worst, the 4th worst, and the 11th worst defense.
That's flexible.
Then the Giants are next. They play Baltimore, who are the worst defense, Atlanta the 9th worst, Indianapolis the 12th. So that's good news for Wandale and for Malik Neighbors. Then you got the Packers. So it's an interesting one. So you look at this wide receivers and you go, the Packers. But actually, when you look at the Packers' schedule and their matchups are really like Jane Reed's is okay, Christian Watson's is kind of okay, but Romeo Dobbs, as I said earlier, is really bad. So there's painting a picture underneath the lines here. So if you're being naive and you look at the top line and say, oh, well, the Packers have got a great schedule. I mean, the next 2 weeks for the Packers is absolutely horrific. But weeks 15, 16, 17 don't look too bad. But having said that, I still don't trust Romeo Dobbs. For the Raiders, it's good news for Jacoby Myers. He's got Atlanta, Jacksonville, and New Orleans. And then the Dolphins. So this could be the revival of Jaden Waddle. Houston, San Francisco, which isn't that great. But he ends with Cleveland, who are the second worst. So, yeah, I quite like Christian Watson, potentially. But, yeah, I'm probably staying clear of Romeo Dobbs.
That's fair. I've got New England, Chargers, Giants, Vegas, and KC. That's my top 5. So Giants and
there's your
Las
reason
Vegas.
To keep Worthy then.
I mean, yeah, get your Wandale Robinson in. I reckon that's
absolutely.
They're gonna be throwing the ball a lot. Streaming tight ends. No one's streaming a tight end at this point in the season, are they? Because they're all a dumpster fire, really.
Well, Theo Johnson here is an interesting talk. So he's got the second best fantasy playoff schedule: Baltimore, Atlanta, Indianapolis. I will say the margins are really fine here. So, like for example, it's we're talking like a couple of points here. So I'm trying to find like one of the worst defenses. So the Chargers have got the 20th worst defense, and they're giving up 8 points a game. And then Carolina have the worst to tight ends, and they give up 14 points a game. So it's not a big difference, really. We're not talking big numbers here. But if you're looking for like, I just need someone just to plug and play, Theo Johnson of the Giants makes a bit of sense here. He has Baltimore, Atlanta, and Indianapolis, which is fairly decent matchups. I'm not worried about Trigger Conku. He's got the best schedule, but he just doesn't score enough fantasy points. Trey McBride is third. He's already owned. David Njoku's got the 5th. He's already owned. And the Broncos don't really target the tight end. So not a player I'm too worried about interfering with here.
No, K. Dotton, obviously, but he's owned.
Yeah, K. Dotton will be owned. I think he'll see a decrease of targets now. Now that Mike Evans is back.
Big Mike. How are we streaming these kickers? Are we streaming kickers or?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't do any research on kickers, so I'll go with your list here. Really, it's a difficult one. For me, Chase McLaughlin makes the most sense in terms of ownership to upside. Chase McLaughlin doesn't miss that many kicks. The Buccaneers offense will score a load of points. Chase McLaughlin will get a decent amount of fantasy points, so I quite like him. I'm looking at like ones that are reasonably owned. Josh Carty, maybe. The problem is there's not that many like great kickers. Jason Sanders, if he's not owned that much, is probably going to be a decent option. So I wouldn't mind him. Maybe Matt Prater might be a different option for you because he's got a long leg as well. So there's another good option for you there.
Who's the Washington kicker?
Austin Seibert.
Austin Seibert.
I mean, he'll be well owned because he had some big games, but he had an absolute stinker at the weekend where they had a chance to tie the game. So Washington needed a touchdown, a 2-point conversion, an onside kick recovery, a touchdown, and an extra point to tie the game.
Mm-hmm.
So they got the touchdown, they got the 2-point conversion, they got the onside kick recovery, they scored the touchdown. Austin Seibert missed the extra point.
Yeah, wide left as well. It wasn't even close.
Yeah. So then what happened was, this is the biggest bonehead play of the weekend, was they onside. So they try an onside kick again. It's a terrible onside kick, and the Dallas player picks it up. Well, he catches it effectively, and then he runs it in for a touchdown. Now, if he goes down at the 1 or the 2, it's game over. But he doesn't. he runs it in for a touchdown. They kick the extra point. They go up by 8. So then actually Washington still have a chance to tie the game. Whereas actually, and they didn't, but they still had a chance to tie the game. Whereas if he'd just gone down, there's no timeouts left. They take a knee, it's game over. So it was a really dangerous thing to do to score the touchdown.
Yeah. Complete opposite of Jeremy McKinnon for the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You see, that's the smart play. So then, kickers. Chase McLaughlin's the guy I'd be investing all in on Chase McLaughlin. He to me seems like the best option. Maybe John Parker Romo's not bad. Jason Sanders would be a good option. Maybe Brandon McManus. They might be involved in some shootouts. Green Bay could be half decent, but I don't know how reliable he is compared to others. Spencer Schrader might still be out there for the Chiefs, so you could pick him up. He'll score some points for you.
I'm just looking who's available in my league. Not a lot of people. That's a worry. That is a worry. Okay, let's move on to DSTs. Finish it off with DSTs.
So the 2 DSTs so there's 3 I've got. One I think is probably too well owned, which is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So for me, Tampa have easily the best remaining schedule. So I'm all over Tampa Bay. I really like Jacksonville. So Jacksonville's schedule is in the fantasy playoffs. The Jets, so their last 4 weeks are at Tennessee, at home to the Jets, at Las Vegas, at home to Tennessee. So that's a really good opportunity. The Jags have some playmakers on D, so I quite like their schedule for streaming a DST. Cincy's not bad. Their last 3 games are at Tennessee, Cleveland, and Denver. Indianapolis, at Denver, Tennessee, at New York Giants could be interesting. So they're kind of the 4 for me. I would race to own. So Tampa, Jacksonville. Tampa you can play pretty much every week. But Jacksonville after this week will be a good option. And Cincy and Indianapolis aren't bad options too. They're kind of the 4.
Yeah. I want to say 2 of those 4 go up against Bo Nix, and he's absolutely cooking right now. So play them at your peril, but I don't want to curse the guy. Don't want to curse him.
Yeah, if they don't make the playoffs, it's all your fault now.
Well, hey, look, I didn't expect to be anywhere near where we are at the moment, if I'm honest. So
they have been the surprise team of the season. Absolutely.
We've been good, and we almost beat the Chiefs, so this record could be even better.
Absolutely. Well, you should have beaten the Chiefs.
Should have beat the Chiefs.
Yeah, you really should have done. So look, we've covered waivers, we've covered strategy for streaming options for the playoffs, we've talked about roster construction. I think the last thing I would mention for playoff strategy is I know I talked about having like running backs. When you get into the playoffs, I do think that the last thing I'll talk about is roster blocking. So this is something very few players do, but I do find you can get a little bit of an edge. So this is going back to one of your previous questions. So if you have a player who is streaming quarterbacks or streaming tight ends or streaming DSTs, then that's the time, if you're facing them as an opponent, you want to get in and use your fab or waiver priority to block them getting those additional players. So again, every single week you endeavor into the playoffs and go deeper into the playoffs, the chances of injuries decrease. So if you get onto a bye, I'd definitely talk about this adding of RB strategy now, and I would block and have that for the next 3 weeks. On your bye week, towards the end of your bye week. So I like this is where you can get really creative in your strategy, especially if there's free agency on the Sunday. If there's free agency on a Sunday, if you've held a player for a few weeks, you can add players or streaming options on a Sunday and then the player you drop won't be viable until the following week.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're on bye in week 15, let's say Braylon Allen, let's say Breece Hall is fine, right? He's not injured, gets through, he's going to play week 15. I want to find a really good timing option that could work out, because it might be like an early window, late window kind of job.
I've got a question on Sleeper. If you add somebody on a Sunday morning and then instantly drop them, do they then go to the waiver pool for the Monday?
No.
That's a shame.
There is a rule that you've got to hold them for 24 hours for that reason. So
and you'd have to be super sharp and aggressive to be dropping 100 players to stop anyone else grabbing them Sunday morning.
Yeah. So let's take the Breece Hall situation. He's going to play against the Dolphins in week 15. You could drop him right before the game, bring in your DST. If your opponent is streaming DSTs, you could take the best streaming option off the board before week 16 if they're still available, or the best quarterback streaming option, or the best tight end streaming option, whatever. Like if you've worked out who your likely opponent is going to be in week 16, and obviously you've got to kind of prep for both. So there is a bit here. It works really well with the late kickoffs. If you have a late kickoff player where it's clear the trajectory of the game is going in a certain direction, and then you can pick up a streaming option that's also in a late window, that works out really well. It's not common, but it can happen. But yeah, I like to do it if you're streaming again, if you can block streamers against, especially if you've got the stronger roster. So if you're a 1 seed or a 2 seed, and you're going to be a quote unquote favorite for week 16, roster blocking, if your opponent is streaming, your likely opponent streaming, is a really good way of just, you might gain 2 points, 3 points from that strategy, but those 2 or 3 points could be the difference between you making your fantasy playoff or not. So that's a really key thing. And then week 17, it's obviously very different, because in week 17, if players are on your bench and they're not going to be fantasy relevant, you need to just cull everybody and just bring in anyone who could be streamer relevant. Because if Kyron Williams gets injured in the middle of week 17, Blake Corum doesn't help you, because even if he comes into the game, he's on your bench, doesn't help you. And he can't help you after the season. So you want to stockpile your bench in redraft leagues with those high upside players that could kill you. A Marcus Valdes-Scantling, Noah Brown, Nick Westbrook-Akeen, any of those high ceiling DST streamers that have got good schedules, quarterback streamers that might have a really good schedule in week 17 as well. So they're the ones you want to kind of target and go, yeah, okay, I just want to make sure I'm not facing that player that week. I'm just going to bring them in and add them. So you should do a lot of waiver transactions in your final week.
Yeah, which is not counterproductive, but counterintuitive most of the time, because you think, I'm here now. There isn't a great deal that's going to change between the start of the end of week 16 and the start of week 17. But actually, it makes perfect sense to bin everybody who's not going to get a spot on your roster going into that game and grab as many people who could threaten you as possible.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because I think, too many people have got this mentality of, oh, I want this player to get a ring because he's my favorite player. It's like, it's not a real ring. Sentimentality will kill you in fantasy football. That's for sure. You're better off just being quite ruthless and just cut anybody that is not worth anything, and just really pick up anybody on your roster who could add value, or could add value to your opponent. So, you got to get quite savvy. So for me, I'm hoarding running backs between now and the end of week 15. And then I start to deplete that pool from week 16 onwards, because there's less chance of an injury and there's less chance that it's going to happen. If you've got players who've got niggles and you're holding the handcuff, that's a different kettle of fish. But if you have a player who is extremely healthy and is not going to see a reduced workload in week 17, then you want to start culling them from week 16 onwards.
Yeah, makes sense. I'm going to try that this year in a big way. I'm going to see if I can.
You'd be amazed how many times I've deployed this sort of strategy as a 6 seed and won, and as a 1 seed and won. Like, it does happen. You know, so many times a 6 seed wins because they catch fire because they've got these players on their roster that just catch fire at the right time. And sometimes it is those unlikely players who just come through at the right time and just light a torch and just win it. It's so incredibly common. It happens, I reckon, most years. So, like, if we trend the history of this, right? Last year, I mean, Kyron Williams had a phenomenal finish. He wasn't really highly drafted. Rashad White had a really, really good finish. Ezekiel Elliott had a big finish. He wasn't overly rostered. Najee Harris, he really popped up. 16. He was crap in weeks 14 and 15, and then he was a league winner for people in week 17. He got 24 points. Like, he was massive. In week 16 and 17, he was a really, really big part of that. Jerome Ford as a streaming option came in and did that. Ty Chandler, Zam White, these were all players like Zam White, 15, 16, 17, half point PPR. This is 16, 14 and a half, 13.1, came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
You know, Ty Chandler had a huge week 15, 23 points. I didn't do much the following weeks, but he might have squeaked you through. Khalil Herbert, week 16 and 17. Week 16, 17, 18.6, 19.9. Huge weeks he had. Gus Bus, 15, 16, 17, 13, 13, 10. Tyler Algier, 15, 15, 16, 17. All these players come out of nothing. These are the players you want to catch fire to because you don't want them to catch fire against you. That's the really important thing, because wide receiver performance is very easy to predict, right? For the most part, there wasn't anybody that was really surprisingly good. Zay Flowers, I don't even think he was that much of a surprise. He'd had a pretty good season. Demarcus Robinson, he was playing sort of pinch hitting for injuries. I don't even think that was a big surprise because he came into that stretch pretty strong. Darius Slayton was probably the only one I can think of. He had 16 and then 18 points.
Nice.
Yeah, I think he was probably the only one who had a reasonable run. Wanda Robinson, week 17 points. This is half point. But none of these are huge shocks. So I think for me, you're going to get your upside in your cream at the running back position, which is why we spent so much time talking about it, because you are chasing that. Even if we look at, say, 2022, and we look at this performance again, look at those final 4 weeks of the fantasy season. And again, you've got in here Jerick McKinnon, just absolutely smashed it. He was the running back 2 last 4 games of the season. Cam Akers came out of nowhere to have a really big end of season. Tyler Algier again off the bye had 3 big weeks. I mean, he was mostly the lead back, I suppose, at that time, so I don't think he would have been a catch fire kind of player. Leonard Fournette had a big game, one of his last for the Bucks.
Playoff Lenny.
Raheem Mostert had a couple. This is 2022, not last year, where he was really good. He had 2 great games in his last 3. So it happens more down the stretch, and that's what's really important to try and find these players. Donta Foreman, right? In 2022, week 16, he had 22.5 points. He'd have got someone to a championship final on that performance.
Mm-hmm.
Devin Singletary, 19.5 points. Done nothing. Rashad White, 13.3 points in week 16. You know, those are the kind of numbers that will get you into a fantasy playoff out of nowhere, or will take you out of fantasy playoff contention. So these are why we highlight the running back position, because this is where the most variance lives. I mean, I remember 2021, we had Rashad Penny, right? He had a huge week, and before then Like the final 3 weeks of the season, he just absolutely popped off and then never did anything ever again. So like he got massively overdrafted the following season. So like Rashad Penny, I think over down the stretch was like the running back one for the final 4 or 5 games. CJ Anderson, we talk about that example a lot. Came in for Todd Gurley, won people a championship. We talk about Williams of KC is another one. There are always examples where something just happens and a player just comes in and just absolutely smashes it. Last year in the playoffs as well, quarterback Joe Flacco came off a sofa and did it. It's less likely, but it can happen. Watch those quarterback changes. If an Andy Dalton or Joe Flacco comes in, they can definitely catch fire down the stretch as well. Even Jameis Winston is your likely candidate for that, but he does have a tough schedule. So those are the kind of players you kind of want to add and just mitigate your risk.
Yeah.
Or try and catch fire and chase a W.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Joe Flacco do it this season already, so who'd be surprised if it didn't happen again if Anthony Richardson decides he's tired for a second time this season or something? Who knows? Yeah,
I just seen that Austin Seibert is now on IR.
Okay, not him then.
So, yeah.
Although that does mean the next Washington kicker probably isn't owned, and if you are in a spot of bother, go and grab him because his SOS is pretty good. Rush Nation, make sure you're on the right side of catching fire, not the wrong side, because there's nothing worse than being burnt in the final. Let me tell you, been there, done that. Had a few ships sunk on the horizon the day before. Murph, anything else before we jet?
No, I don't think the Commanders have a kicker.
Oh,
so yeah, because no one carries a second kicker, right? So, I would be just literally glued to the news to see who they sign, because their schedule's pretty decent coming up. So, they do have Zane Gonzalez on their practice squad, so maybe they'll just promote him. So I've just reading the transaction. So they moved Chris Rodriguez up. Now that's really interesting because they've moved Chris Rodriguez up. That is telling me that rather than move the kicker up immediately, they've moved Chris Rodriguez. So that tells me that Brian Robinson Jr. and Austin Eckler are unlikely to play this week. So, and especially as they've got the bye the following week, give them time to rest. That kind of makes complete sense. So with that happening, they've brought up Chris Rodriguez. So he will maybe now Chris Rodriguez is the pivot play to Jeremy McNichols, because when both were out previously, it was actually Chris Rodriguez that got the carries, but I saw he wasn't on the roster. But now they promoted him. Maybe the sneaky play is to add Chris Rodriguez when everyone goes after Jeremy McNichols, because when the last time this happened, Jeremy McNichols got nothing and Chris Rodriguez got all the touches. So
hopefully
that's the pivot that way. And then see what they do when it comes to kicker. Do they activate Zane Gonzalez? I imagine they probably will just bring him up from their practice squad for, well, if he's gone to IR, I assume that they will have to elevate him. They won't be able to just do the practice squad things, but maybe they'll just bring him up week by week. So Zane Gonzalez is the kicker you probably want to add, because it doesn't look like they're going to sign one.
Right, Rush Nation, that's going to do it for today's show. I need to go off and get myself some Chris Rodriguez. Thanks for listening. See you later. No, I'm joking. But yeah, I do have a couple of leagues I do need to go and get some C-Rod in just in case. Rush Nation, don't forget, the offer on the Patreon, Murph, is still on.
Yep, you still get a 1 week trial. I dropped a hugely long, I think it's about an hour and a half Patreon cast. So first of all, apologies to not getting the Fantasy Bible out or start sits this week. Just last week got heavily away. So I prioritized the little window that I had to do a Patreon cast. Those guys are the ones that keep the podcast going effectively from a cost perspective. So, for me, they got the input this week. And I dropped an hour and a half, pretty much, I think hour 20, hour 30 Patreon cast, where I went through every sort of wide receiver matchup for the next 4 or 5 weeks. And that's where I talk about this long list, and you'll hear my surprise. Also in the middle of that, Daniel Jones gets cut. So there's a really crap audio bit where I actually talk about, I'm just going to have to message the Patreons while you're listening to this and message Danny and let him know his quarterback's got cut. So you'll get to enjoy those things. I call the Patreon cast very like rough and ready. I don't put the intro in, I don't put the outro in, no ads. It's literally like me spilling my brain and what's going on. I'm looking at stats and I'm looking at different angles and pathways to victory. So it's really detailed. And if you want really detailed analysis where we go into deep analytics and really looking at edges that we can gain, and it's these marginal edges, that's where if you if you see a load of players in all your leagues picking up same players at similar times, it's because of things like the Patreon cast that they're all getting that kind of information from. So you can take out a trial. It's £3 a month, £3 a month normally, but you can take a trial for 7 days, and you can actually listen to the last couple of Patreon casts and really sort of fill up with a load of knowledge. And I'll be doing weekly Patreon casts for the rest of the season. Also, do join the FFCC. So we are doing a signed jersey giveaway. I promise you there's some good jerseys in that pool to give away. If we hit another 250 quid, or make it 2 signed jerseys. Ooh. So some good jerseys to win if you enter and sign up and donate. So sign up and donate. So a huge spike in the last 24 hours or so, which was great. But we're really close to hitting a really good number. So I want to just keep pushing and getting that in. And also it's nice to come into the year with a nice set of registrants as well. As we look to embark, we just culled. So the FFCC is down to the semi-finals of the main event and the plate and the final of the Squid Game, who are doing it in a penalty shootout style. So,
nice.
So we got down to 2 in week 10. Week 9. So we were down to 2 in week 9. So 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 is a penalty shootout. So they get a prompt. So it's 1-0 after 3 weeks.
Oh, crikey. That is tense stuff.
So yeah, all to play for. There are tiebreakers if we get into weeks 15, 16, 17. And then if I can't split them after that, then they can share it. Because if we've gone through like 8 weeks and can't pick a winner, then we'll go from there. But anyway, it's good fun. So we have 10 players out of 324 that started left alive in the 3 competitions. So give them a lot of love. I just put their names on Elon Musk's fun ground, so you can check that out. But yeah, all the links are on there. I think it's on our pinned tweet, so do that. And please sign up and please donate. It'd be great to have you. And then charity playoffs are going to be kicking into full swing. Scottish Bowl playoffs started this week, so I made it through to round 2. Currently in the top 200. So I've got a big problem in week 14 because I've got Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry on bye.
Ooh.
And I think, and I've lost Daniel Jones, so I'm going to have to start Cooper Rush.
Hey, their schedule's not terrible.
No.
Schedule's not terrible. Rush Nation, don't forget, if you're watching on YouTube, we thank you very much. Murph's going to do his special outro in a moment. Please hit the like and subscribe button because it really does help us out. Like Murph said, the Patreon is free for a week if you want to do a trial. And this week, you basically get 3 hours of Murph and an hour and a half of me for nothing. It's a free trial.
For nothing,
so,
for free. Well, you got to listen to the ads because the ads do also help keep the pod going.
Yeah, so don't be skipping the ad, Rush Nation. But there's going to be more. There's going to be more playoff talk as we head towards, and there are just 2 weeks left. But as always, Rush Nation, don't forget, keep on rushing.